What's up, guys? Today it's Austin at the shop, working on my 93 Caprice here. Doing an LS swap with a little turbo in it, a little single turbo. But today I'm just going to go over the build, kind of what I'm doing with it. So far I've got the firewall painted and it's all undercoated. The motor is sitting in it, but I got to pull it back out and change the fitting out. So we'll throw in some time lapses of it coming out so you guys don't have to sit here and listen to me talk about that for an hour. But that's kind of all I got going on. I'll go over the parts when I have the motor pulled out and I'm going through that. But you can kind of see I kind of already have it all tore apart. But we'll end up putting the front end all back together, do some of that stuff. But we'll go through everything. It is a bagged 93 Caprice. So, guys, now we're going into welding up the inner fenders. I already have one done, but we'll go through a little time lapse of just me welding it back together. So, in 91 to 96 Caprices, I cannot find inner fenders anywhere. So mine, I'll just have to weld them together and end up doing that. I already have the outer fender, and then there's more like an inner fender panel that I already painted up and stuff like that. The outer fenders are new. They sell those. So if you're looking for inner fenders, or there's a panel that goes inside there, and I'll show you guys that later. But if you're looking for those for your 91 to 96 Caprice, you'll have to go to a junkyard and find one that's somewhat together. And a core support. Mine's kind of tore apart, but can't find one anywhere, so I'll have to see what I can do there if I got to go drive and find one, or kind of salvage mine together. But not quite that far. That'll probably be next video. But I'll cut into the time lapse of me welding this together. So as you can see, I got it all welded up, and I mean, I'm not a welder, but it's all looking pretty good so far. So you can see all these used to be holes. These were bigger holes. Like I said, I'm not a welder, so it might look like it sucks. Probably because it does. So all these holes I had here, I know that they needed to be plugged. So I'll end up smoothing them out, all that stuff. You can see I had a DA out for a little while, so that's what. Some of this is smooth, and then some of it's rough. So I had it sandblasted before, and then when they sandblast it, it gets all rough and not super awesome. So I'll end up DAing it and sanding it all. Otherwise, when we powder coat it, it'll end up being rough like this. We don't want that to happen. So I'll smooth this all out, get it ready for powder coating, and we'll throw it in the booth and get it all powder coated up for you guys. So we'll get into that, show you guys how all the powder coating works and all that, and then yeah, that's about it. So I got the motor pulled out, and this is just a fitting that was screwed into the oil pan. So I put a plug in there, and that's about all that I had to do to that. But I'm gonna throw on the accessory drive here, kind of show you guys what that looks like. So these are the pulleys that they give you for the alternator bracket. And those will just sit here, so the alternator goes up top and then the power steering's down low. But then this is for the compressor, for the AC. You end up having to run like the pancake style, where they're like that thick, which I'm not a big fan of. But with the motor mounts and stuff down here, the old air compressor used to sit down there. So you can see I can't really do that with these motor mounts, but I mean, that's not a big deal because exhaust will end up coming. I'm going to end up changing those brackets, and then it'll end up coming down here, I believe. So it'll be a little bit different once I get the headers and stuff on there. But as you can tell, it gets kind of tight in here. So having an air compressor down there and lines running up would be kind of hard. So they'll end up coming out here and then going back to the firewall there, where I got to get some fittings to change too. But I'll get the motor all thrown apart and flip you over to a time lapse. So I just got done putting the accessory drive on, kinda. I don't know if the bolts they send are different, but that hole is, pardon my language, but that hole is fucked. So that kind of puts a wrench in the plans for now. I got to put a different water pump on anyways. So as you can see, those pulleys don't line up. So this is a big pulley. That's supposed to be on the big pulley, but yeah, I got to tighten this stuff down. Obviously that bolt, and then there's a bottom one here. Go to the water pump, and then there's a bracket in the back, and these two bolts go on here. There's another one down there, if you can see that. Top one's just a through bolt that just tightens down, so that's not a big deal. But the alternator and power steering side is kind of a bitch. So again, sorry for the language, but if you've ever worked on something, this is just frustrating. I'll end up having to probably helicoil that, so basically heat up like threads and then slide it in there. And yeah, a lot more work than I need to do. And then the bottom, I think the bolts they send are just a little bit too long because they doesn't quite thread all the way in, and I don't know if their spacer's long enough. So we'll kind of see with some of that stuff when Chris gets here and he can help me do some of that, but just kind of frustrated with what's going on. Oh, I did cut off, there's like a sleeve that goes on here and just must just cover that joint. So I took that off because with the power steering line, it ends up hitting that, or it did. So should be fine now, but just a little bit of frustration here. So I think I'm going to call it a night. Might film going into powder coating the inner fenders, but why don't we just roll that clip? I'll go into powder coating the inner fenders, and I'll do one of those tonight. Show you guys how that turns out. But that's going to be all for today, and I'll get into putting the front end together as part of the next video. But yeah, that's all I got for you guys. So we'll roll into powder coating, show you guys how to do that, meet you guys at the oven. So I'm over here in the powder coat booth. I have one of the inner fenders done, so I'll show you guys how to do that. You got to make sure you sand all this with like 320, or I used 180 just kind of because I was in a hurry, didn't want to go through the whole process. But the inside I'm going to leave rough. They sandblasted it, and it's pretty rough. And there's whatever. You can see the welds that pop through from doing all that stuff. But I'll switch it to a time lapse just because the fan that we run to keep the powder outside and not floating around the shop getting on customer cars, it's kind of loud. So I don't want you guys listening to all that. But we'll get right into it. Powder coating that. I'll show you guys what it looks like when it's done. So I just put the inner fender in the oven. It's got to cook for 30 minutes at about 400 degrees. So usually I just set it to 400 so it'll cook whatever. It'll get up to that temp, but at about 30 minutes it usually gets to around 370 degrees. So that's about, I mean, by the time it hits about 30 minutes, it should be flowed out pretty good. I'm not going to clear this one, but most of the time I end up clearing some stuff, and yeah, it's pretty much the same process. You just take it out at about 15 minutes, and then you change the powder coat machine. You change the bucket to a clear. So in here is just black powder. You can see it all over the floor, but then that powder there is clear. I just haven't sweeped up from the last time that I powder coated, but that's about all, the only way that works. So it's just air goes into there, kind of makes it whoosh around, and then it vacuums it up through here and comes out the gun. And then it like electrically sticks onto there. So that's why I had a ground on there. But that's kind of how that works. So it just kind of magnetically sticks on to the metal that you're powder coating with. So you can't powder coat plastic or anything like that, especially because it would melt in the oven. But that's kind of how all that stuff works. I'll use Cerakote for my headers when I end up doing that, and all that tube, or I'll just leave it stainless. I'm not sure yet, but when it comes out, I'll show you guys the finished product. I'll show you the difference between what spots are sanded and what spots aren't sanded, because it makes a huge difference. So I just pulled the inner fenders out of the oven. So here it is. This is the side that I sanded all down. As you can see, it's pretty smooth. There's a couple spots where it was a little rusty, so those holes didn't fill in, but you can see down there it was really rusty. And that's kind of just the way it is when it's not completely smooth. But like I said, you can't get these fenders for 91 to 96 Caprice. So then this is the inside. So the inside I ended up not sanding down at all, just to kind of show you guys what it looks like. So you can see some spots where it's like really kind of flaky, and that's where they kind of hit it with the sand blaster kind of a little bit harder. You can see in there it's a little bit smoother, then it gets kind of rough. You can see that there. So when you end up powder coating, make sure everything's smooth, make sure everything's clean, and make sure it gets cooked long enough, because if you end up not cooking it long enough, it ends up getting pretty rough and stuff like that anyways. So prep it, clean it, cook it. That's all you got to do. That's all I got for the Caprice vlog today. We'll get into putting the front end together next week. And yeah, it's kind of all we got right now. Shop's pretty busy, so I don't get to work on my car during the week. But weekends is usually free to me. Next weekend might be a struggle getting that all together, but once we get everything kind of fixed, once I get everything on my car fixed, and what I mean by that is fixing up the threads on this hole, getting that all figured out, and then getting a shorter bolt for the bottom. And I can get that all done. Next week, we'll get a powder coat the intake and see what it's kind of like a chromish red powder coat looks like on the intake lid here. And these runners will be black, but we'll see what color I picked out. We'll see what it turns out like. So it's going to be exciting. It's going to be fun. Tune in next week for some more Caprice videos. So later.